Why did they send her? No one asked it aloud, not with the wind clawing through the outpost and the mountain air burning in their lungs, but every man in the tent thought it. The Hindu Kush stretched out before them, a jagged white-tanned ocean of stone that swallowed sound and time. Snow whispered across carrying dust, frost, and something else. Dread, even inside the thin-walled command tent, the wind sounded like a living thing, pressing in from all sides. They huddled around a grainy satellite print, the kind that only looked clear when you were far enough away not to need it. A fortified village clung to the valley floor almost 3 kilometers out, just a smear of clay and shadow between two peaks. Somewhere in that cluster of mud walls and corrugated tin was their target, a high-ranking insurgent leader, the kind who never stepped outside unless he thought the world had forgotten him. It was the kind of shot you didn't take, unless you wanted your name whispered in sniper schools for decades. It was also the kind of shot that couldn't be taken. Staff Sergeant Miller, stocky and carved from the habits of 3 combat tour, set down his coffee mug like it weighed 100 pounds. "Windows 5 seconds at most," he muttered, his eyes locked on the image. "And that's if the wind isn't shifting, which it is, every damn second." Private Langley adjusted the spotting scope, stared, then pushed it away like it had insulted him. "I can't even see his shadow anymore, even if we had a shot. It's not doable." Captain didn't answer. He stood apart from the others, flipping through a manila folder dropped off that morning by a that had barely cleared the ridge. No rank, no clearance level, just a single name handwritten in block letters across the front. Cole, R. Inside, one photograph blurry, a figure on the edge of a cliff, rifle raised, still as stone. It wasn't enough to tell you who she was, but it told you what she could be. The sound of tires crunching over frozen gravel made them all turn. A Humvee pulled up outside, its engine coughing in the thin air. Dust and ice blew past the open door as a woman stepped down. Tall, lean, her face hidden behind dark goggles and a scarf pulled high over her mouth. No luggage, no extra gear, just a rifle case in one hand and a battered wind logbook in the other. Her movements were unhurried, unafraid, like she had already made peace with whatever she was walking into. Miller leaned toward Langley. "Who the hell is that?" Langley shrugged. "No clue, but she's either lost or she's our Hail Mary." Met her halfway, extending his hand. "Cole." "Yes, sir." "You've read the situation." "Yes, sir." "You believe the shot can be made?" She opened the wind logbook with her gloved hand. Rows of handwritten notes covered the pages, terrain sketches, wind curve calculations, corrections for drop and drift, some already dated for today. "I believe," she said quietly, "that shots aren't impossible, just not yet understood." The words didn't land like bravado, they landed like math. Inside the tent, conversation slowed as she entered. Sniper teams thrived on reputation, and she had none they could touch. The tech specialist, working a stubborn tablet in the corner, leaned toward Miller and murmured, "No service record I can pull, black bars across everything. Even the nickname, Ghost Hawk, is rumor." Cole unpacked her rifle in silence. It wasn't standard issue, competition-grade precision fused with battlefield grit. The scope lens had an odd cut, the kind you wouldn't find in a catalog. The grip was worn smooth, as if it had been sanded by hand for feel rather than looks. Even the firing pin was wrong, in a way that meant right. No one asked questions. You didn't touch another shooter's weapon, you just watched. She stepped outside, away from the tent, and into the wind, not a single digital device in her hands. She tore tiny threads from a strip of cloth and let them fall into the air, watching the way they danced before vanishing into the void. She didn't check a watch, didn't call for readings, she simply listened. Miller sidled up to, arms folded. "You gonna spot for her?" "She doesn't want a spotter," said. "Excuse me." "She calculates everything herself, wants silence." The word hung there for a moment, heavier than it should have been, silence. She lay prone on the ridge, aligning her rifle with a single cracked window in the far-off village. The wind clawed at her jacket. She didn't move. Minutes became 20. The target flickered into view for less than a second. She didn't fire. 30 minutes, nothing. An hour, still nothing. Langley whispered, "She's frozen, we're gonna lose the window." Didn't look away from her. "She's breathing, she's not frozen." And then barely she moved, adjusted the rifle's angle, turned a dial, then went still again. An hour later, the target stepped into the frame once more. Her fingers shifted almost imperceptibly. No blast, no flash, no recoil. Just a click so soft that even the wind might have missed it. The radio crackled 30 seconds later. Confirmed, target down. Langley's mouth fell open. That's it. She was already on her feet, rifle slung over her shoulder. Impact confirmed. No smile, no sigh, she just walked away. The outpost had seen kills before, but never like this. No spotter, no muzzle signature, no visible recoil, no second chances. Nearly 3 kilometers through mountain wind, and she made it look like Tuesday. No one clapped, no one spoke. It was too soon to understand what they'd just seen. But later in the tent, over coffee gone cold, they would all admit the same thing. Whatever Cole had just done, it wasn't luck. It was something they didn't have a name for. The generators hummed through the night, but even they seemed quieter after her shot. The outpost never truly slept. Yet something in the air had changed. The usual banter was missing. No one asked about her method. No one asked why there had been no sound. Because if you asked, you'd have to admit you didn't understand. By dawn, a new folder lay on the command table. Another target. Another face that would never smile in the sunlight again if they could reach him. Intelligence suggested he was the successor to the man she had just dropped, moving through the same valley, but with heavier protection and an erratic routine. He rarely ventured outside, and when he did, it was only to cross a 10-foot gap between 2 buildings, 4 seconds of exposure, maybe 3 if the wind pushed him faster. Langley stared at the satellite images and shook his head. That's not a window, that's a blink. Glanced toward the corner of the tent where sat, her rifle propped beside her, notebook open. The others were boot deep in tech. Langley adjusting software, Miller testing comms, programming drone flight paths. But she worked the way she always did, alone, pencil scratching over paper, lines and arcs, small circles, no devices, no chatter. "You're already being talked about at Fort," said quietly. She looked up for only a moment. Was it recorded? Only the impact. Good. You don't want credit. Her eyes fell back to the page. I want silence. It wasn't arrogance. It was something else. A refusal to dilute the thing she had just done by turning it into a story. When the briefing ended, she didn't linger outside. The wind carried new voices. Different, sharper gusts from the east. She tied fabric strips to thin branches and planted them in the snow at varying heights. She walked the ridge, not looking for the enemy but for how the air moved over the land. Back inside, Miller argued with Langley about the shot's feasibility. 5 feet of wind shear at that range will push a round right past him. Langley leaned on the table. Even if it hits, body armor's gonna stop it unless it's surgical. This isn't just hard. It's fantasy. Neither of them noticed watching from the corner. His eyes tracking as she entered, brushed the snow from her sleeves, and sat without a word. That night, while the others rotated through sleep cycles, she remained under the dim glow of a lantern, redrawing the village from memory. She marked where moonlight would fall at each hour, when shadow lengths would compress, when the air's weight would shift with the temperature. By morning, the wind had changed again, hard east to west now. Even the Earth's curvature would matter at this distance. On the ridge, the team took their positions, lay prone, her cheek against the stock, eyes steady through the scope. She didn't blink, not once. An hour passed. The target stepped into the gap. Langley's breath hitched. "That's it." "No," said Wrong Wind. She didn't move, didn't explain. At 1437, a barely perceptible change rippled through the air. Only she felt it. A dip in the gust. Her fingers found the elevation dial. Not a calculated number, but a correction she felt in her bones. A flicker, the target appeared again. 1 second. 2. 3. A click, no sound. 30 seconds later, the comms officer's voice cracked through the headset. "HQ confirms impact. Target neutralized." Didn't rise immediately. She breathed once more, slow and deep, then began unscrewing her scope. Approached. "You're not using readouts, no spotter, how?" She slung her rifle, meeting his gaze only briefly. "Wind speaks, you listen." The tent was silent when she walked back in, but not out of politeness. It was the quiet of people realizing they'd just seen the same miracle twice and still didn't understand it. Miller broke the silence later, his voice low. "She's not guessing, she's tuned." Langley frowned. "Tuned to what?" Miller didn't answer. She hadn't always been Ghost Hawk. Once she was just a quiet girl in southern Texas, raised on horses and dust. Her grandfather, a retired Marine, taught her to shoot when she was barely 6, not just the mechanics, the stillness. "The rifle isn't your weapon," he would tell her, adjusting her stance. "Stillness is." They trained in the fields, not at a range. She would lie for hours in tall grass, waiting for the wind to pause. Missing a shot wasn't failure. It was information. She would reload without a word, take aim again, and wait. By her teens, she was beating grown men in small-town competitions. She never celebrated, no fist pumps, no victory laps, just a nod, pack up, disappear. Joining the army wasn't about fighting. It was about precision, structure, and challenge. At Fort Benning, she baffled instructors. Near-perfect scores in every environment, under every stress simulation, mud, rain, uphill, downhill. It didn't matter. She adjusted without hesitation, without visible thought. One instructor called her the quiet hurricane, not loud, but impossible to ignore. She didn't socialize while others crowded around phones. She filled her log book, pages of angles, hand-sketched terrain maps, drift formulas, no apps, no shortcuts. During her final qualification, she made a moving headshot across a ravine. A shot no candidate had ever landed cleanly. One round, dead center. The evaluators checked the target twice, convinced something was rigged. From there, the assignments changed. Ops, extreme weather missions. Files so redacted they were barely paper anymore. Somewhere in those years, her name faded and the call sign stuck. Ghost Hawk. Back in the present, the mess tent was a slow murmur. Langley stirred his coffee, eyes on the table. "I don't get it. She doesn't check maps, doesn't need the wind grid, how?" Miller leaned forward. "I saw her trace the slope of the mountain with a pencil. She's feeling the shot." "That's not a strategy," Langley said. "It is if it works every time." Walked in with another file this time. A third target, even farther, shielded by cliffs, only visible through reflected glass. He set it down. "We don't take this unless Ghost Hawk says we can." They turned to her. She didn't look up from her notebook. When she did, she scanned the file once and said, "Shot can only be made before noon." "Why before noon?" Langley asked. "After noon, thermals rise, the bullet dances." No one spoke. Miller just nodded slowly. Watched her as she went back to cleaning her rifle, slow and methodical. He knew by now, stillness wasn't what she used to take a shot. Stillness was the shot. And when she finally said, "That's the window," they all believed her. The sun hadn't fully crested the ridge when she lay flat on the cold rock. Her eye locked to the scope. Her other eye closed to shut out distraction. She hadn't moved in nearly 40 minutes. Every breath matched the wind's rhythm, like she was syncing herself to something no one else could hear. The rest of the sniper unit crouched behind gear and optics, watching from safer spots. some tracked through drones, others through high-grade scopes. They had redundancy layered on redundancy, every tool modern war could offer. She had a rifle. And the wind. The third target wasn't a soldier, he was worse. The ghost behind the ghosts, logistics, movement money, the man who kept fighters fed, armed, and invisible. They'd only spotted him because of an accident, a broken window in a cliffside hideout. At a certain time each morning, light would angle through the valley and paint his silhouette for just a heartbeat. His voice was low in her earpiece. Thermals start to rise in an hour. After that, your curve gets ugly. This is your only window. Understood, she whispered. The wind was already playing tricks, gusting northeast, then southwest without warning. Her notes were pinned under a small rock beside her, filled with marks that meant nothing to anyone else. Langley, crouched next to Miller, muttered, "She hasn't adjusted her bipod once." "She is the bipod," Miller said. 5 minutes to the light window's voice came again. "He's moving, shadows in the frame." She didn't speak. Her left hand brushed the windage knob, fine-tuning in increments so small the numbers didn't matter. The air grazed her cheekbone and temple, her sensors. Then there it was. A flicker. Light caught the curve of the man's shoulder as he stepped forward. "Take it," urged. She didn't. 3 seconds passed, 4, the target vanished. Langley nearly choked. That was it. "The gust dipped," she said softly, never looking away from the glass. "Bullet would have lost altitude. Better no shot than a failed one." They waited, minutes stretched into 30. The wind shifted again, sharper now. His voice had an edge. "Second pass, he's visible." Her finger moved, not quick, not slow, but inevitable. The silence cracked with the same impossible click, too soft to call a gunshot, no recoil, no signature. 30 seconds later, the radio confirmed. "Target neutralized, single shot, clean." Miller turned toward her. "I didn't even see your hand move." She checked her notebook. Trajectory changed, aimed 1 inch lower. "Stepped closer, you saved the mission." She looked at him with calm eyes. "I waited for the moment, that's the mission." And just like that, she was on her feet, packing her gear, walking away. In the mess tent that night, the team spoke in low voices, careful not to let the words become too loud. "That's 3 impossible shots," Langley said. "They weren't impossible," Miller replied. "She just knows something we don't." Even who'd seen great shooters, SEALs, Delta, Recon, couldn't compare her to anyone else. She never missed, but maybe more important, she never fired unless she knew the outcome. Restraint as precise as her aim. When he told her, "Pentagon's going to want to talk to you," she only said, "I didn't come here to rewrite doctrine, I came to finish the mission." It wasn't humility, it was absence of ego. Langley later managed to borrow her wind log. He thought he could decode her process, maybe even learn it. But the pages didn't read like science. No formulas, just sketches, symbols that looked like music notation, circles over dates. "This isn't math," he whispered, "this is rhythm." That night found her on the cliff's edge, watching the stars. She accepted the thermos he offered but didn't drink. "You know," he said, "my first deployment we had a sniper, good one, could shoot through a tire at 500 meters. Thought he was unbeatable. One day he missed. Guy survived. 3 days later, he blew a convoy apart." She didn't answer. Stared out over the dark valley. That miss followed him until he put the rifle down for good. Finally she spoke. "A bullet is a decision. You have to know why before you know where. You've never missed." "Not on mission." A pause, "once off mission." He didn't ask about that. Some stories live better in silence. The next morning, a new file waited for her. Border crossing, political sensitivities. The kind of job you didn't even speak about in a secured tent. She didn't need the briefing. She scanned the file, closed it, and said, "I'll need 37 hours and a quieter rifle." tried not to smile, anything else. She tapped the place on her chest where the wind would hit her jacket. I need the silence to hold. He didn't understand her methods. Maybe no one did, but he knew this. When Cole aimed her rifle, even the world seemed to hold its breath. Back at the outpost, the story of her third shot spread without names. She became the ghost who shot the wind. Enemy chatter warned fighters to stay away from windows, cover the glass. Even her own team had stopped doubting Miller, who once called her a fantasy, now simply nodded when she passed, as if acknowledging a truth you didn't need to say aloud. And somewhere above the wind carried her name, though she had no interest in hearing it. She wasn't chasing legacy. She was chasing the moment when the world went still. The city was loud in a way the mountains never were. The kind of noise that didn't just fill the air, it layered itself over every thought, every instinct, until the silence felt like something you had to fight for. People moved in fast currents along marble walkways, 1,000 lives crisscrossing without collision. Drones hovered above, their soft hum disguised by traffic and the constant buzz of conversations. If there was a place in the world where you couldn't vanish, it was here. And yet Cole walked through it unseen. 3 days before the target was scheduled to cross the political plaza, she arrived wearing an oversized construction vest, tinted safety goggles, and a hard hat. The rifle was disassembled inside a battered tool case. No one stopped her. No one looked twice. The plaza was perfect for the target. A middle-aged political advisor to a corrupt regime. It was open, camera-laced, and saturated with security. The ideal stage for public appearances. The perfect nightmare for anyone trying to take a shot. High-rise glass towers ringed the square, creating swirling wind tunnels that shifted direction by the minute. Every surface reflected sunlight like it had been designed to blind optics. Pedestrian traffic moved like weather. Unpredictable, dense, chaotic. For most, it was impossible. For her, it was just Tuesday. Her vantage point wasn't chosen by convenience. She climbed 30 floors in a partially vacant office building across from the plaza. No elevator. Too many cameras. She used the service stairs, counting her steps, listening to the way the air changed as she climbed. The floor she picked was an unfinished glass conference room, the furniture still covered in plastic from here. She could see the exact point where sunlight bounced off one particular tower, hitting the plaza fountain in a 3-second glare. 3 seconds. That was all she needed. Between 10:40 and 11:50 each day, the plaza was chaos. Tourists, guards, tour guides waving flags. At exactly 12:08, that chaos softened, tour groups paused, drones shifted positions. There was an odd lull, like the city took one slow breath before moving again. Her window would live inside that lull. For 2 days, she did nothing but watch. No rifle assembled, no notes left behind except the ones she kept in her head. She tracked reflections in building glass, counted the seconds of drone sweeps, marked the precise times when wind tunneled between towers and when it dropped into pockets of still air. She released chalk dust from a balloon one afternoon, letting it drift and scatter across the current between rooftops. The pattern told her what the instruments never could, how the air moved between glass and stone when the sun hit the plaza's southern edge. On the morning of the third day, she arrived at the building in the same disguise, same steps, same calm. She could have been any worker, invisible in the blur of the city. At 12:05, the convoy appeared. The lead vehicle stopped short, forcing a tight formation around the target's car. Bodyguards fanned out, black suits, mirrored sunglasses, scanning in choreographed precision. Was already prone on the conference room floor, cheek to cold metal, scope lined on the plaza. Her breathing was absent from the world. So slow, and even it didn't disturb the reticle. The target stepped from the vehicle, bald, confident, a practiced smile for the crowd. He took 3 steps toward the fountain. A tour guide's flag lifted in the corner of her scope. Sunlight flared off the glass tower across the square, spilling into the fountain. Cameras blinked into blind sync. Her finger moved a single millimeter. There was no bang, no flash, not even a tremor in the barrel. 1.6 seconds later, the man folded inward like a puppet with its strings cut. He knelt into nothing, head bowing as if in silent prayer. No blood, no splatter, just collapse. The reaction was delayed. A ripple of confusion moved through the plaza before panic took hold. Guards swarmed, tourists screamed, children clutched at parents. But the bullet had left no visible mark. The body dropped clean, too clean. By the time the guards reached him, she was already disassembling the rifle, tucking each piece into the tool case. She walked toward the stairwell at the same pace she'd climbed it, not hurried, not slow, just part of the city's machinery, a shadow in daylight. On the street, the sirens screamed overhead, but no one looked at the woman in the safety vest walking away from the chaos. Across the world, encrypted channels exploded. Target is down. Repeat, target is down. Where's the shooter? How the hell did she? There was no answer, not from her, not from anyone. 2 hours later, a classified report filed under the Black Ops Terminal read: Asset GH9, Operation Fulcrum complete status, undetected result. 1 shot, 1 kill, extraction unnecessary. At the mountain outpost, read the report without lifting his head. Langley and Miller sat in silence, the weight of what she'd done hanging in the air. That's God level, Miller muttered. No, Langley replied, that's. In the weeks after, conspiracy theorists tried to piece together what happened in the plaza. Footage was blurred by the flare, witness accounts conflicted. No rifle was found, no shell casing, no shooter. Theories ran from drones to microweapons, to divine intervention. Inside the military, no one guessed they knew, and they didn't speak her name. Meanwhile, in a quiet room with no windows, wrote in her logbook, not about bullets, but about wind pressure patterns over the Gulf Coast. A handler looked at the notes. Why an oil rig? She didn't look up, because if they try to sabotage it, they'll do it during the storm. You want to be there. I want to be already there. The Gulf was already shifting when she arrived. Cloud banks stacked on the horizon, towering into the sky like the walls of some ancient fortress. The air was heavy, electric, charged with the kind of tension that made even seasoned sailors look at the water a little differently. The storm had been building for days, winding itself into a Category 4 beast, spinning toward the Louisiana oil grid with the kind of slow inevitability that made escape feel like a lie you told yourself. Most rigs had already been evacuated. One was still listed as under maintenance in official logs. The intel said otherwise. According to intercepted chatter, a private mercenary group, funded by an exiled billionaire with a taste for chaos, planned to ride the hurricane in, plant explosives, and vanish in the confusion. The detonation would cripple a key energy artery. It was a move calculated for maximum impact and minimum trace. What they hadn't calculated was her. She boarded the rig 2 days before the storm's eye, disguised as a weather technician, hard hat, work gloves, ID badge with a name that wasn't hers. She carried nothing that looked like a weapon, just a case of sensor equipment that customs barely glanced at. The crew accepted her without question. Everyone was too busy with shutdown procedures to wonder about the quiet woman who seemed more interested in the wind than the machinery. When the last chopper lifted off, she stayed behind. The storm's outer bands hit that night, rain slashing sideways, steel groaning under the assault. The rig swayed in the swells, the ocean below roaring like an animal just out of sight. She moved through the structure like it was a living map, tracing the paths between compressor units, turbine towers, and maintenance catwalks. Every angle, every echo chamber, Every steel corridor's resonance was stored in her head. By morning, she knew the rig's rhythm the way she knew the wind in the mountains. At 12:47 the next day, the false crew arrived by chopper, 6 men in maintenance coveralls, faces shadowed by the storm's dim light. She watched them from inside a hydraulic panel behind the exhaust tower, rifle assembled, wrapped in an oilskin. The rain lashed the rig in sheets. The wind screamed past at 38 knots, twisting her hair beneath the hard hat, but her breathing stayed even, syncing with the rig's sway. The men split into 3 teams. The lead carried the detonation gear. They moved fast, cutting toward the compressor wing. The one place the storm cameras couldn't hold a steady image. She didn't need the cameras. Through the scope, she tracked the first man, adjusted 74 meters left, compensating for wind curve. The hurricane's gusts would have thrown most shots into the sea, but she read them like they were printed across the air in ink. The first man knelt to open his kit. The click was swallowed by the storm. The bullet curved like it had been pardoned by the wind itself, finding the base of his skull without sound or spray. The second man turned in shock. She had already chambered. One blink, another shot, the storm bent the arc perfectly, dropping him into a pipe valve. Gas hissed into the air, masking the sound. The third man froze. His radio hand shook. She didn't fire. Sometimes silence was the sharper weapon. He bolted for the helipad, slipping in the rain. The chopper lifted, tilted into the gale, and disappeared into the sheets of water. Within minutes, a secondary drone confirmed. Operation failed, team down, rig secure. No one could explain how. The camera feeds showed nothing. No figure, no muzzle flash, not even a shadow, just wind and rain. Later, investigators found a single embedded round deep inside a steel support beam, its copper jacket twisted, not from impact, but from the way the storm had bent its path. Back on the mainland, Langley listened to the recovered audio logs. He leaned toward Miller, voice low. "She's not a sniper, she's a storm reader." When handed the sealed after-action report to a Black Ops general, the man skimmed it once, then frowned. She stayed through the eye. Nodded. "Why?" She said the wind had more to teach. The general leaned back in his chair. "What does she want in return?" "Nothing," said, "just to be left alone until the wind changes again." 6 months later, a museum exhibit opened in Virginia. Snipers of the Silent War. Most visitors drifted past the corner display without stopping. Inside the glass case was no rifle, no medal, just a blank logbook, open to a page with 2 hand-drawn spirals and a single name in small handwriting. R. Cole. To most, it looked incomplete. To those who knew, it was perfect. She was never seen in public again. Some swore she had vanished into the Alaskan wilderness. Others believed she still walked war zones in silence, the wind her only companion. Back at the old mountain outpost, Miller sometimes left a single round on the cliff's edge. No note, no message, just an offering to the air. If she returned, they would know. The call didn't come by phone. It came in the form of a single, unmarked envelope slipped beneath her cabin door in the middle of the night. The ink on the flap was still damp when she opened it. Inside, satellite images, a grainy headshot, and a folded sheet of paper with exactly 12 words. Target moves only in public. Shot must be clean, no witnesses. There was no return address. No operation name. No briefing location. She knew what that meant. The target wasn't just a man, he was a statement. A political advisor propping up a fragile, corrupt regime with ties in places no one admitted existed. Taking him out wasn't just about removing a player. It was about shifting the board. In the wrong hands, the kill would become propaganda. In the wrong moment, it could start a war. And the people who had chosen her knew she wouldn't take the shot unless it was perfect. By the time saw her again, she was already unpacking her rifle in a dim corner of a 2 countries away. "You didn't tell me you were back on op tempo," he said. "I didn't need to." He glanced at the photos on the table, neutral territory. She nodded. "Too many cameras, too many civilians, the air will be thin." Thin? Between buildings, tunnels of crosswind, that's the danger. Exhaled and the shot. Before the car door closes, no sooner, no later. The city was nothing like the Gulf. No open sky to read. No endless horizon to pace herself against here. The wind ricocheted between glass and steel, breaking apart and reforming like shards in a cyclone. She moved through the streets in the same way she always did, becoming part of the machinery. Today she was an electrician, high-vis vest and toolbox, taking her place among the hundreds of invisible workers the city relied on but never looked at. Her vantage point was 30 stories up in a tower. She'd found the floor 2 days earlier, stripped of drywall and ceiling, raw beams framing the skyline like a sniper's gallery. From here, she had a line on the plaza where the target would appear, but only through a gap in the urban armor, a slice of space between mirrored buildings where light would flare for seconds, blinding the cameras. She spent those 2 days building the shot, not assembling the rifle, just building the moment. Watching how shadows shifted when buses pulled into the transit lane. Nodding the exact second when pigeons lifted from the rooftop nests. Memorizing the oscillation of a service drone's patrol route. Every detail was a variable. Every variable mattered. The morning of the op was colder than forecast. That would change the density of the air, but not enough to throw her calculations. At 12:09, the motorcade entered the plaza. At 12:10, it slowed. At 12:11, the target emerged. Middle-aged, expensively tailored, the kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes. He waved to the crowd, taking 3 steps toward the fountain. The sun flared between towers, cameras blinked into sync. Her finger moved a fraction. The click was softer than a pen tapping a desk. 1.6 seconds later, the man stopped mid-step, his body folding inward like a kite collapsing in still air. No spray, no impact noise, just absence. The crowd's confusion was brief, the panic swift. Guards swarmed. By the time they reached him, she was already packing the rifle into her toolbox, lowering the lid and walking toward the stairwell. 2 hours later, in a room far from the plaza, a secure terminal logged the after-action report. Asset GH9, Operation Vector complete status, undetected result, 1 shot, 1 kill. Read it once, then folded the paper. What he didn't see was where she went after. Not to a rendezvous. She walked to the edge of the city, to a half-abandoned pier that faced nothing but water and sky. She sat on the rusted edge, elbows on her knees, wind playing at her jacket. She didn't look like a woman who just shifted the balance of a government. She looked like someone listening for an answer only the air could give. And if anyone had been close enough, they might have heard her say, almost to herself, "Not every bullet ends a life, some end what would have been." By the time the dust from the Plaza mission settled, her name, real or otherwise, was no longer hers alone. It belonged to whispers. In briefing rooms, they called her GH9, in encrypted field chatter. She was the ghost who shot the wind. On enemy radio bands, it was more visceral. "Don't stand in the light, don't open the glass, she's here." None of them had ever seen her. And that was the problem. When brought her the next assignment, he didn't put it on the table. He handed it to her like he was passing a weapon. "This isn't the same as the others," he said. She unfolded the packet. The target was a black market broker specializing in weapons shipments to insurgent factions. It should have been straightforward. Find the window, make the shot, disappear. It wasn't. Problem asked. She tapped the third page. He knows about me. The broker wasn't moving in a normal security bubble. He'd built his entire routine around the assumption she might be hunting him. Meetings in reflective corridors, travel in armored vehicles that doubled as mirrors. He even rotated his bodyguards every 48 hours to avoid letting her read their gait. His jaw tightened means he's scared. It means, she said, he'll change something at the last second, not for safety, for unpredictability. The op site was a port city. Docks, cranes, cargo containers stacked into walls and alleys. Too many blind corners. She arrived under a different cover this time. Dockside inspector, clipboard in hand, laminated ID swinging from her jacket. Her rifle was hidden in a false-bottomed inspection case, broken down into pieces that looked like diagnostic tools. It took her 30 hours just to map the terrain. She traced the paths between container stacks, found the places where wind funneled in hard crosscurrents, and noted the gaps in the port's camera coverage. Her vantage point wasn't the highest spot. She'd learned in cities that the highest point was often the most watched. Instead, she picked a steel maintenance platform midway up a crane, where she could see through a narrow seam between containers into the broker's meeting spot. The shot would be brutal, long-range through a gap barely wide enough for a man's shoulder, with the wind bouncing between metal walls like a trapped animal. She settled in at dawn, hours before the broker was due to arrive. She didn't wait for him to enter the frame before preparing. She waited for the wind to tell her how it would behave when it did. The port lived in its own weather. Some gusts came cold from the ocean, others hot from the exhaust of cargo haulers, twisting together into invisible knives. She tracked them without instruments, watching the way loose paper skated across the dock, the way steam rose from vents and swirled before breaking apart. At 14:02, the broker entered the meeting area. He walked slower than the security footage had suggested, purposefully slow, like he wanted to stretch her window and make her guess. The man he was meeting leaned on a container wall. Bodyguards fanned around them, all with mirrored sunglasses. Her breathing didn't change. She watched the wind push against the nearest flag, saw it hesitate, then reverse direction, not the moment. The broker gestured with his right hand, laughed at something. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, but she didn't move past it. Another gust shifted, this time from behind the crane. She adjusted the scope's elevation by instinct, not number. The broker stepped sideways into the seam between containers. Click! Through the glass of her scope, it was like watching a candle blow out. The broker's knees buckled, his hands scraping against the metal wall as he slid down. The meeting scattered, guards shouted. She was already breaking down the rifle. By the time anyone searched the crane platform, there was nothing but the creak of steel and the smell of. Back at the studied the mission report. You realize they're going to change the way they move because of this. They already have, she said. They'll be hunting for you now. They'll be hunting for a story, that's all they've got. But it wasn't just the enemy who was watching her. In Washington, a group of analysts compiled every shred of footage and mission data they could find. They were trying to build a pattern, a ghost hawk profile they could use to predict her next move. They failed. Her decisions didn't align with sniper doctrine. Sometimes she took the shot in seconds, sometimes she waited hours. She ignored perfect wind days. She sometimes shot in storms no one else would even attempt. The data set looked random. To them, it was noise. To her, it was rhythm. A month after the port op, she was approached by an intermediary. Not military, not intelligence, something in between. The job was simple on paper. Eliminate a target during a formal dinner in a heavily guarded embassy courtyard. Too simple. She declined. Too many stories in the air, she said. What stories? The man asked. The ones they want told after the shot. She walked away before he could ask more. That night on the edge of another nameless city, she stood on a rooftop watching the wind tumble scraps of paper across the street. The silence here was different, urban silence, with the hum of neon and the far-off echo of sirens. She wasn't listening for orders anymore. She was listening for the moment when the hunt for Ghost Hawk became louder than the reason she was sent at all. And when that happened, she knew the silence she depended on would be gone. The message reached her in the only way that could have worked, through the wind itself. Not literally, but close enough. A folded slip of paper slid under the door of a she'd been using as nothing more than a place to sleep. No name on it, no mark of sender. Inside, a set of coordinates, a time, and a single word, optional. Optional wasn't a word she heard often in her line of work. Missions were orders. Orders were absolute. Optional meant something else entirely. It meant whoever sent it didn't know if she would take it. She stared at the paper for a long moment before folding it into her logbook. The coordinates pointed to a border town in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place maps forgot about, except when something ugly happened there. The target was a former intelligence officer turned broker of secrets, the kind of man who sold not just names, but entire lives. He was also a father of 3, and according to whispers, terminally ill. The wind in the town was strange. It came in from the desert, hot and slow, curling in off the rooftops before slipping into the alleys. The air smelled of rust and dry stone. She took a vantage point in an abandoned bell tower on the edge of the central square. From there, she could see him, sitting in the shade outside, a chipped coffee cup in his hand. No security, no armored convoy, just a man in the shadow of the awning. It would have been the easiest shot of her career. No wind shift, no glass, no interference. Nothing but distance and her decision. She raised the scope, settled the crosshairs on his chest. She saw him take a slow sip. His hand shook slightly when he set the cup down. His gaze drifted past the square, toward a street where 3 small figures ran, laughing, the children from the dossier. They didn't see her. They wouldn't have understood if they did. Her finger rested on the trigger, still and certain. And then she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The shot didn't come. She watched the wind lift the dust from the street and scatter it into the sun. She broke down the rifle piece by piece and placed it back in the case. Hours later, she walked through the market, blending into the crowd. She passed close enough to hear his voice, a low, tired laugh at something the vendor said. She didn't look back. She opened her logbook to a blank page. Instead of sketches or calculations, she drew a single, unbroken line from one edge to the other. No notes, no numbers, just a line. By morning, she was gone. No one saw her leave, no convoy, no flight manifest. In the intelligence briefings weeks later, the operation was listed as inconclusive. The man lived another 5 months before dying quietly in his home. The file was closed without fanfare. Heard about it third hand. When he finally found her months later, she was sitting on a cliff edge above a storm-lashed coast, her hood pulled up against the spray. "You had the shot," he said. "Yes." "You didn't take it." She didn't answer right away. Finally, a bullet is a decision that one didn't need to be made. The wind rose, carrying the smell of salt and rain. Studied her face, trying to read what was left unsaid. He knew better, some things you didn't get to know. She stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. "Where will you go?" he asked. She glanced at the horizon, where the silence is still possible. Then she walked away, the sea spray swallowing her outline until she was nothing but part of the weather. In the years after, her legend grew in ways she could never control. Some said she'd died in the mountains, others claimed she'd been captured, or that she'd gone rogue. The truth was quieter. Sometimes a single round appeared on the windowsill of a forward outpost. No note, no message, just the offering. Sometimes a shot no one could explain ended a firefight before it began. No muzzle flash, no sound, just the moment, and then the absence. And in a few rare cases, a target's life ended not by the rifle, but by time, because somewhere in the wind, a woman had decided not to fire. The stories couldn't agree on where she was, or if she was still working at all. But they all agreed on one thing. When Cole aimed her rifle, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the stillness. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes it doesn't act at all.